Chapter 29, Loading for Home, a surprise, last of an old friend, the last hide, a hard case, up anchor, for home, homeward bound. We turned in early, knowing that we might expect an early call, and sure enough, before the stars had quite faded, all hands ahoy, and we were turned to, heaving out ballast. A regulation of the port forbids any ballast to be thrown overboard. Accordingly, our longboat was lined inside with rough boards and brought alongside the gangway, but where one tub full went into the boat, 20 went overboard. This is done by every vessel, for the ballast can make but little difference in the channel, and it saves more than a week of labor, which would be spent in loading the boats, rowing them to the point, and unloading them. When any people from the Presidio were on board, the boat was hauled up and ballast thrown in, but when the coast was clear, she was dropped astern again, and the ballast fell overboard. This is one of those petty frauds which every vessel practices in ports of inferior foreign nations, and which are lost sight of among the countless deeds of greater weight, which are hardly less common. Fortunately, a sailor, not being a free agent and work aboard a ship, is not accountable, yet the fact of being constantly employed without thought in such things begets an indifference to the rights of others. Friday and a part of Saturday we were engaged in this work until we had thrown out all but what we wanted under our cargo on the passage home, when, as the next day was Sunday and a good day for smoking ship, we cleared everything out of the cabin and forecastle, made a slow fire of charcoal, birch bark, brimstone, and other matters. On the ballast in the bottom of the hold, caulked up the hatches and every open seam, and pasted over the cracks of the windows and the slides of the scuttles and companionway. Wherever smoke was seen coming out, we caulked and pasted, and so far as we could, made the ship smoke tight. The captain and officers slept under the awning which was spread over the quarter-deck, and we stowed ourselves away under an old studding sail, which we drew over one side of the forecastle. The next day, from fear that something might happen, orders were given for no one to leave the ship, and as the decks were lumbered up with everything, we could not wash them down, so we had nothing to do all day long. Unfortunately, our books were where we could not get at them, and we were turning about for something to do when one man recollected a book he had left in the galley. He went after it, and it proved to be Woodstock. This was a great windfall, and as all could not read it at once, I, being the scholar of the company, was appointed reader. I got a knot of 6 or 8 about me, and no one could have had a more attentive audience. Some laughed at the, quote, scholars, end of quote, and went over the other side of the forecastle to work and spin their yarns. But I carried the day and had the cream of the crew for my hearers. Many of the reflections and the political parts I omitted, but all the narrative they were delighted with, especially the descriptions of the Puritans and the sermons and harangues of the Roundhead soldiers, the gallantry of Charles, Dr. Radcliffe's plots, the knavery of trusty Tompkins. In fact, every part seemed to chain their attention. Many things which, while I was reading, I had a misgiving about, thinking them above their capacity, I was surprised to find them enter into completely. I read nearly all day until sundown, when, as soon as supper was over, as I had nearly finished, they got a light from the galley, and by skipping what was less interesting, I carried them through to the marriage of Everard and the restoration of Charles II before 8 o'clock. The next morning we took the battens from the hatches and opened the ship. A few stifled rats were found, and what bugs, cockroaches, fleas, and other vermin there might have been on board must have unroved their lifelines before the hatches were opened. The ship being now ready, we covered the bottom of the holdover fore and aft with dried brush for dunnage, and having leveled everything away, we were ready to take in our cargo. All the hides that had been collected since the California left the coast a little more than 2 years, amounting to about 40,000, were cured, dried, and stowed away in the house, waiting for our good ship to take them to Boston. Now began the operation of taking in our cargo, which kept us hard at work from the gray of the morning till starlight for 6 weeks, with the exception of Sundays, and of just time to swallow our meals. To carry the work on quicker, a division of labor was made. 2 men threw the hides down from the piles in the house, 2 more picked them up and put them on a long horizontal pole, raised a few feet from the ground, where they were beaten by 2 more with flails somewhat like those used in threshing wheat. When beaten, they were taken from this pole by 2 more and placed upon a platform of boards, and 10 or a dozen men, with their trousers rolled up, were constantly going back and forth from the platform to the boat, which was kept off where she would just float with the hides upon their heads. The throwing the hides upon the pole was the most difficult work, and required a sleight of hand which was only to be got by long practice. As I was known for a hide cure, this post was assigned to me, and I continued at it for 6 or 8 days, tossing in that time from 8 to 10,000 hides, until my wrists became so lame that I gave in, and was transferred to the gang that was employed in filling the boats, where I remained for the rest of the time. As we were obliged to carry the hides on our heads from fear of their getting wet, we each had a piece of sheepskin sewed into the inside of our hats, with the wool next to our heads, and thus were able to bear the weight day after day, which would otherwise have soon worn off our hair and borne hard upon our skulls. Upon the whole, ours was the best berth, for, though the water was nipping cold early in the morning and late at night, and being so continually wet was rather an exposure, yet we got rid of the constant dust and dirt from the beating of the hides, and being all of us young and hardy, did not mind the exposure. The older men of the crew, whom it would have been dangerous to have kept in the water, remained on board with the mate to stow the hides away as fast as they were brought off by the boats. We continued at work in this manner until the lower hold was filled to within 4 feet of the beams, when all hands were called aboard to commence steeving. As this is a peculiar operation, it will require a minute description. Before stowing the hides, as I have said, the ballast is leveled off just above the keelson, and then loose dunnage placed upon it, on which the hides rest. I think that's really hilarious. I'm sorry, I have to speak as the reader here. This is page 258, and suddenly he's going to say they're going to commence steeving, and then, as this is a peculiar operation, it will require a minute description. Now, the whole book, sometimes 5 to 10 terms on a page are terms I don't know. You know, leeward, battened, the hatches, all the boat terms he uses. But now all of a sudden at page 258, he finally says he's going to give a minute description. And within the first sentence of the description, he says words I don't know. I don't know what ballast is. I don't know what a keelson is. And I don't know what dunnage is. That's the first sentence of how he's going to explain it to me. He uses 3 terms that I don't know. Before stowing the hides, as I have said, the ballast is leveled off just above the keelson, and then loose dunnage placed upon it, on which the hides rest. The greatest care is used in stowing to make the ship hold as many hides as possible. It is no mean art, and a man skilled in it is an important character in California. Many a dispute have I heard raging high between professed beachcombers as to whether the hides should be stowed shingling or back to back and flipper to flipper, upon which point there was an entire and bitter division of sentiment among the savans, S-A-V-A-N-S, and for some reason in italics. Division of sentiment among the savans. We adopted each method at different periods of the stowing, and parties ran high in the forecastle, some siding with Old Bill in favor of the former, and others scouting him and relying upon English Bob of the Ayacucho, who had been 8 years in California and was willing to risk his life and limb for the latter method. At length a compromise was effected, and a middle course of shifting the ends and backs at every lay was adopted, which worked well, and which, though they held it inferior to their own, each party granted was better than that of the other. Having filled the ship up in this way to within 4 feet of her beams, the process of steeving commenced, by which 100 hides are got into a place where one could not be forced by hand, and which presses the hides to the utmost, sometimes starting the beams of the ship, resembling in its effects the jack screws which are used in stowing cotton. Each morning we went ashore and beat and brought off as many hides as we could steeve in the course of the day, and after breakfast went down into the hold, where we remained at work until night. The whole length of the hold from stem to stern was floored off level, and we began with raising a pile in the after part, hard against the bulkhead of the run, and filling it up to the beams, crowding in as many as we could by hand and pushing in with oars, when a large book was made of from 25 to 50 hides, doubled at the backs and put into one another like the leaves of a book. An opening was then made between two hides in the pile, and the back of the outside hide of the book inserted. Two long, heavy spars, called steves, made of the strongest wood and sharpened off like a wedge at one end, were placed with their wedge ends into the inside of the hide, which was the center of the book, and to the other end of each straps were fitted, into which large tackles were hooked, composed each of two huge purchase blocks. One hooked to the strap on the end of the steve, and the other into a dog, fastened into one of the beams, as far aft as it could be got. When this was arranged, and the ways greased upon which the book was to slide, the falls of the tackles were stretched forward, and all hands tallied on, and bowsed away until the book was well entered, when these tackles were nippered, straps and toggles clapped upon the falls, and two more luff tackles hooked on, with dogs in the same manner, and thus by luff upon luff, the power was multiplied until into a pile in which one hide more could be crowded by hand, an 100 or an 150 were often driven in by this complication of purchases. When the last luff was hooked on, all hands were called to the rope, cook, steward, and all, and ranging ourselves at the falls, one behind the other, sitting down on the hides, with our heads just even with the beams, we set taut upon the tackles, and striking up a song, and all lying back at the chorus, we bowsed the tackles home, and drove the large books chock in and out of sight. The sailors' songs for capstans and falls are of a peculiar kind, having a chorus at the end of each line. The burden is usually sung by one alone, and at the chorus all hands join in. And the louder the noise, the better. With us, the chorus seemed almost to raise the decks of the ship, and might be heard at a great distance ashore. A song is as necessary to sailors as the drum and fife to a soldier. They can't pull in time or pull with a will without it. Many a time when the thing goes heavy, with one fellow yo-hoing a lively song like Heave to the Girls, Nancy O, Jack Crosstree, etc., has put life and strength into every arm. We often found a great difference in the effect of the different songs in driving in the hides. 2 or 3 songs would be tried one after the other with no effect. Not an inch could be got upon the tackles, when a new song struck up seemed to hit the humor of the moment and drove the tackles 2 blocks at once. Heave round Hardy, Captain Gone Ashore, and the like might do for common pulls, but in an emergency, when we wanted a heavy raise the dead pull, which should start the beams of the ship, there was nothing like time for us to go round the corner or hurrah, hurrah, my hardy bullies. This was the most lively part of our work, a little boating and beach work in the morning, then 20 or 30 men down in a close hold where we were obliged to sit down and slide about, passing hides and rousing about the great steves, tackles, and dogs. Singing out at the falls and seeing the ship filling up every day, the work was as hard as it could well be. There was not a moment's cessation from Monday morning till Saturday night, when we were generally beaten out and glad to have a full night's rest, a wash and shift of clothes, and a quiet Sunday. During all this time, which would have startled Dr. Graham, we lived upon almost nothing but fresh beef, fried beefsteaks 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. Wow. During all this time, which would have startled Dr. Graham, we lived upon almost nothing but fresh beef, fried beefsteaks 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. At morning and night, we had a quart of tea to each man, and an allowance of about a pound of hard bread a day, but our chief article of food was the beef. A mess, consisting of 6 men, had a large wooden kid piled up with beefsteaks, cut thick and fried in fact with the grease poured over them. Round this we sat, attacking it with our jackknives and teeth, and with the appetite of young lions, and sent back an empty kid to the galley. This was done 3 times a day. How many pounds each man ate in a day I will not attempt to compute. A whole bullock, we ate liver and all, lasted us but 4 days. Such devouring of flesh, I will venture to say, was seldom known before. What one man ate in a day over a hearty man's allowance would make a Russian's heart leap into his mouth. Indeed, during all the time we were upon the coast, our principal food was fresh beef, and every man had perfect health, but this was a time of especial devouring. What we should have done without meat I cannot tell. Once or twice, when our bullocks failed and we were obliged to make a meal upon dry bread and water, it seemed like feeding upon shavings. Light and dry, feeling unsatisfied and at the same time full, we were glad to see 4/4 of a bullock just killed swinging from the foretop. Whatever theories may be started by sedentary men, certainly no men could have gone through more hard work and exposure for 16 months in more perfect health and without ailings and failings than our ship's crew. Let them have lived upon Hygie's own baking and dressing. Friday, April 15th. Arrived, brig Pilgrim from the windward. It was a sad sight for her crew to see us getting ready to go off the coast, while they, who had been longer on the coast than the Alert, were condemned to another year's hard service. I spent an evening on board and found them making the best of the matter, and determined to rough it out as they might, but my friend S. was determined to go home in the ship, if money or interest could bring it to pass. After considerable negotiating and working, he succeeded in persuading my English friend, Tom Harris, my companion in the anchor watch, for $30, some clothes, and an intimation from Captain Falcone that he should want a second mate before the voyage was up, to take his place in the brig as soon as she was ready to go up to windward. Trying to communicate with that Seahawk that's in a tree next door to stop making so much fucking noise while I'm reading. What I'm saying is stop that shit, fucking Seahawk. He's looking over at me too. The first opportunity I could get to speak to Captain Falcone, I asked him to step up to the oven and look at Hope, whom he knew well, having had him on board his vessel. He went to see him, but said that he had so little medicine and expected to be so long on the coast that he could do nothing for him, but that Captain Arthur would take care of him when he came down in California, which would be in a week or more. I had been to see Hope the first night after we got into San Diego this last time, and had frequently since spent the early part of a night in the oven. I hardly expected when I left him to go to windward to find him alive upon my return. He was certainly as low as he could well be when I left him, and what would be the effect of the medicines that I gave him I hardly then dared to conjecture. Yet I knew that he must die without them. I was not a little rejoiced, therefore, and relieved upon our return to see him decidedly better. The medicines were strong and took hold and gave a check to the disorder which was destroying him, and more than that, they had begun the work of exterminating it. I shall never forget the gratitude that he expressed. All the Kanakas attributed his escape solely to my knowledge, and would not be persuaded that I had not all the secrets of the physical system open to me and under my control. My medicines, however, were gone, and no more could be got from the ship, so that his life was left to hang upon the arrival of the California. Sunday, April 24th. We had now been nearly 7 weeks in San Diego and had taken in the greater part of our cargo and were looking out every day for the arrival of the California, which had our agent on board. When this afternoon some Kanakas who had been over the hill for rabbits and to fight rattlesnakes came running down the path singing out, "Kale ho," with all their might. Mr. H., our third mate, was ashore and asking them particularly about the size of the sail, etc., and learning that it was moku, nui moku, hailed our ship and said that the California was on the other side of the point. Instantly all hands were turned up, the bow guns run out and loaded, the ensign and broad pennant set, the yard squared by lifts and braces, and everything got ready to make a good appearance. The instant she showed her nose round the point, we began our salute. She came in under top-gallant sails, clewed up and furled her sails in good order, and came to within good swinging distance of us. It being Sunday and nothing to do, all hands were on the forecastle, criticizing the newcomer. She was a good, substantial ship, not quite as long as the Alert, and wall-sided and kettle-bottomed, after the latest fashion of South Shore cotton and sugar wagons. Strong, too, and tight, and a good average sailor, but with no pretensions to beauty and nothing in the style of a crack ship. Upon the whole, we were perfectly satisfied that the Alert might hold up her head with a ship twice as smart as she.